Hello and welcome to part 2. So we'll continue on the next category of drugs, which is stimulants. So we'll talk about 3 major stimulants, which are caffeine, cocaine, and amphetamines. However, there are many different types. We'll focus on these 3. Caffeine history. So caffeine has been used throughout history. As long ago as 5,300 BC, there have been found cultivated places in South America where the cocoa plant, which contains caffeine, has been grown for consumption. And it's been used in Asia to make tea from many different plants from as long as 2,100 years ago. However, the coffee that actually is what is the main way we consume caffeine today, it was first believed to have been used over 1,000 years ago, discovered by a goat herder who in Ethiopia, his goats were going about and they started to eat some berries. And after consuming those, they started jumping around, acting skittery. And the goat herder was thinking, what's going on here? And eventually he boiled it in soup, I assume, or in water. And after consuming that was the first use of coffee, and that turned into the drink which he discovered through his goats initially eating the plant. So many different plants will produce this. It's used in tea, coffee, and even from the different plants just consuming them. How it works. So in the brain, it affects adenosine. Adenosine is what the body naturally uses to tell you you're sleepy, you're tired, you need to rest. Caffeine will work as an antagonist. It will block the adenosine neurotransmitters from being released. So it will not allow the body to tell you that you're sleepy, you need to rest, and at the same time, it can also increase the release of dopamine and norepinephrine, which are both involved in pleasure, as we know, dopamine, and reward areas, and also alertness and focus with norepinephrine. So it does both of those things. Let's see about the toxicity and abuse. So use over a long time by blocking the adenosine receptors, it can cause the adenosine to work overtime. So the body will be like, oh, we're being blocked. It will produce more of those receptors to combat this. The body is amazing and will adapt, build tolerance to anything we put inside it very quickly. So if you consume cups and cups of coffee for days upon a time to stay up, it can result in headaches, depression, and extreme fatigue. And about the adenosine receptors being built when stopping using caffeine, it can build tolerance, our bodies, on caffeine. So when stopping it, there is a real withdrawal, which can result in the body being extra tired because it's not receiving what it's used to in caffeine, as well as maybe very irritable, having a headache. And don't worry, Ma, me too. The body reacts very quickly to this and can quickly build more adenosine or repair the receptors. And it can be tapered off if someone wants to reduce their coffee or caffeine consumption by just decreasing the amount bit by bit each day. However, there's not extreme dangers of caffeine in the form of coffee. The dangers come in the form of energy drinks, which have large amounts of caffeine, mainly made with synthesized substances and chemicals that aren't natural, and those can even cause panic, anxiety, and even maniac behavior, and often causes an increased heart rate as well. Next, we have nicotine, another stimulant. So nicotine, the history, it has also been around for thousands and thousands of years. We've seen fields of tobacco leaves in the South Americas since 6000 BC, where people would use tobacco as recreational purposes, maybe, and even in religious ceremonies, as we see often in the Native American Indians. They would use it maybe as a peace offering. So it's used in many cultures, similar to alcohol, to add to their ceremonies, or even just as a cultural icon, as peace. So when Christopher Columbus first came to the Americas, he discovered in the Caribbean islands tobacco, and that's when it began to spread like wildfires throughout the Western countries. It spread to Europe. People loved it, and it even went from it was prescribed by doctors, where there were people saying it's healthy, and we've seen a lot in the past century that has proven this wrong and shown us what these substances actually do to the body. So now there are over 1 billion users of tobacco globally. So how it works in the brain, mechanisms of action. Nicotine will first release dopamine. So it will make dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin, which all work together, boosting alertness, making you feel more happy, as well as at the same time, it will, just like caffeine, it will act as an antagonist to adenosine neurotransmitters. So it will block the body from telling you that you're sleepy. So it does those two things. It will increase euphoria through dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin, alertness, serotonin, as well as stopping adenosine. So it will keep people awake. That's why it's used by many soldiers to stay awake. The toxicity and abuse. So the main addicting component of nicotine is that it's smoked and delivers an almost instantaneous effect on the body from doing so, and that's a huge factor in how addictive it is. So it's not exactly lethal from just using it. It would take a large dose of 30 to 60 milligrams, whereas in one cigarette there's maybe 10 to 12, but it will be reduced through the filter to about 1 or 2. when actually smoked. However, the real danger comes from long-term use, as studies have found out that almost 50% of long-term users will develop, will end up, uh, will end up dying because of symptoms related to the long-term use, such as lung diseases, or heart diseases, or cancers. Annually, it kills almost 500,000 people. Let's go on to psychomotor stimulants. So these are cocaine and amphetamines. So we'll talk about those two. However, I did want to mention that amphetamines, which is meth, basically, there are now many different variants of that are prescribed to treat ADHD, which I don't personally like the fact that we are prescribing children these substances. However, this is more of learning about what it actually does. However, I just wanted to mention that amphetamines, mainly used to treat ADHD now, contain very similar structures and cellular effects as methamphetamine. So Adderall, Ritalin, Concerta, their cells are structured very similarly to meth, and they're basically chemical cousins of that. Let's look at the history. So Peru has the longest history of the coca leaf, which is what cocaine actually comes from. However, they would chew it, which releases a small amount, versus cocaine, where it takes out the acetylchlorine chemical and compounds it into a powder, making it much more effective. Peruvians have used it for thousands of years in religious ceremonies, and to this day it's a common thing to consume the leaves recreationally or for work, as it gives energy. It wasn't until 1855 when the cocaine alkaloid was extracted from the leaf by a German chemist. And at this time, with the birth of Coca-Cola, one huge factor that added to that was the addition of coca leaves as an ingredient. So it contained initially quite a bit of the coca leaf, not actually extracted cocaine. However, it did have many of the similar effects, being energetic and giving a euphoria feeling as well. And so as we learn about this, in the 1890s, many of the what's called fluff was given to plantation workers to increase their productivity while working. So it became more and more popular until very early 1900s. There began to be a very anti drug propaganda by the government, and even using Negro cocaine fiends as a menace to be example of, and which led to the illegality of cocaine as we see now. So that was mainly due to lots of government propaganda that wasn't actually scientific. And now let's go to meth. Meth began for medicinal purposes and was used starting in World War II by both the allied and the Axis sides, it was produced and given to soldiers to give them energy, increase their productivity, help them stay awake for long periods of time, and stay alert. So it's synthetically made, sometimes from even bath salts or other hazardous chemicals. And so from World War II to now, it's gone through phases of being used in certain crowds like biker gangs, and going through being deemed an illegal Class A scheduled drug. Now it's developed, that has made a huge underground market, which we see happening in super labs in Mexico and even in the southern part of the United States. So I see this as a huge danger, as amphetamines and meth is not actually from a natural substance such as cocaine or caffeine. Instead, it's synthetically produced. So how they work? So they work by acting as indirect agonists. So they will block the monoamines, dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. So those three are involved in one, pleasure, making you feel happy, two, staying alert, staying awake, and aware, and also decision making. So it will increase your good feelings as well as keep you awake and energetic at the same time. And it works by binding to the receptors, and instead of making more go or stopping, it will trap those neurotransmitters inside the cleft, and they will continue to work without being allowed to leave. And depending on the stimulant, cocaine versus meth, as we are focusing on, there is a big difference in the effects. For example, meth has a much higher potency compared to cocaine.